All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. Today we're talking to Brett Putter. And Brett, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to talk to you. I think you have a lot of interesting stuff that will be very helpful for a lot of people out there. So welcome. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Dylan. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Of course. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you because I think you have a couple different areas that you focus on that are really exciting. I know you've written a book on culture, company culture, and you have some interesting ideas there. And you also help people transition from working out of an office to going remote, which obviously is very topical right now. So let's kind of just start at the beginning with a little introduction so people know who the heck you are and what you're all about.
Cool, yeah. So thanks. My name's Brett. I'm the founder and CEO of CultureGene. CultureGene is a culture development platform. We use software and human expertise to help companies define, embed, and manage their culture. So we typically work with companies that understand that culture is important but don't really know what to do about it or how to embed it. I'm also an author. I've written two books. The first one is called Culture Decks Decoded, which is an analysis. It's a deep dive into the best culture decks, starting with Netflix and looking at Asana, HubSpot, Hootsuite, LinkedIn, and many others. And the second book is called Own Your Culture, How to Define, Embed, and Manage Your Culture. And there I interviewed just over 50 CEOs of high-growth companies to understand exactly what they do on a day-to-day basis to really build a strong, functional culture. Quite a tactical book versus strategic. It's, if you want to know how remote companies recruit, then that's in there. If you want to know how people work with transparency, that's in there, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's lots of good examples of what companies do to build a strong functional culture.
That's really interesting. And I'm curious, I don't know if you studied this kind of stuff or if you just kind of found a passion at it at some point, but what led you to this point of focusing on culture and working with CEOs in this kind of way?
Yeah, so I was really very, very fortunate to find my passion because I'm going to do this until the day I die. But basically, until about 4.5 years ago, I was running an executive search firm out of London, working across Europe and the US, working with high-growth companies, placing C-level and VP-level candidates. And I was lucky enough to work with 3 companies almost in a row where the CEOs had a very clear understanding of their culture. And so I was asked to, find somebody who matched the job spec with the right skills, the right experience, right expertise, and so on. But I was also asked to find somebody that matched the values of the company. And this was a much more challenging, just a completely different search, because it's hard enough finding good candidates, but now finding good candidates that match the values pushed the boat out a bit. So it took us longer, but actually when we got to the interview process, they ran much, much smoother. There were situations where it felt like the CEO and the candidates were, had been dancing tango for 10 years. They just kind of got one another, and it was there. You could just see it. And then the impact that those candidates made on the companies over the next couple of years just demonstrated to me that there was something very, very interesting here and fundamentally different. And that's where I started to research and read about and study culture and interview the people I interviewed.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I don't have a background in this kind of stuff at all. I just kind of became interested in it at a certain point. But just through my conversations with people so far, it's crazy to me, that how little focus is paid in that area. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of shocking. I don't know if it sounds like you kind of had that same experience where it's like, what? Why is this not the main thing we're caring about here? It's weird.
Yeah, it is. I think the reason is because culture is largely invisible, subconscious, and intangible, and it happens below the surface. You can see culture a little bit, but most of it is invisible. And so it's quite hard as a leader to get your head around this thing that you can't see, you can't measure, you can't touch. And that's really my job. My job is to help leaders build systems inside their organizations and make them more of an asset to the business where they become levers and strengths in the business. But yeah, it's so from my experience, the vast majority of leaders sort of understand that culture is important but don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do, right? Like I think being in that position, it seems overwhelming, right? Like, you need to address it, but where would you even start? I feel like, is that like what you're feeling from these people when you have the conversations? Like just a confusion overall of where to begin in that process?
Yeah, it's I think I've written a book that solves that, because if you read Own Your Culture, it gives you a step-by-step guide and a process to follow to build the system. But it's not surprising, because if you think about it, most leaders are fighting fires all the time. So where am I going to get the time to now study something I don't really know? I can read about Southwest, but Southwest is not the same as my company, and I can read about Netflix, but it's not the same as my company, and we don't run the business the same way. So what am I going to do? I've got to read hundreds of books to find something that makes sense to me. No, so that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I built CultureGene, to help companies go through that process. But some companies, some leaders start with the vision and mission and values, which is the right place to start, define the values, but then they don't know what to do with the values once they've defined them. And so nothing changes in the business, but we've got some values now, we've ticked that box. So yeah, it's not easy, and leaders don't have time now. Also we've been thrown into this washing machine of a pandemic, so I think everything's upside down and chaos. So it's understandable that people are going, okay, let me just focus on the stuff that I can measure and the stuff that I can control easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I totally get that sense, where it's like when you have a million things going on in your personal life, in your business, whatever, like we all have been in that situation where it's like, I know I need to address this thing, but I've got to get this done first, and I wonder like how you approach that conversation with those people that know, like, I know I need to address it. I know it's an issue, but it's not killing my business today. Like, we're okay for now. So they just put it off, they put it on the back burner. It's like, yeah, we're going to get to that next quarter or whatever. Like, how do you approach that conversation with people?
Yeah, I generally don't talk to people like that.
They got to know.
They've got to go through some pain or have had a realization. So most of my clients have done some work on their culture, and they don't know what to do next, and they don't know if what they've done is right, or they've done a lot on culture and they just want to take it to the next level. They realize how important it is. They realize it's the critical piece of the puzzle, and they want to perfect it as much as is possible. You can't have the perfect culture, but you can build a really strong functional culture that acts as a magnet, both from an attraction point of view and as a repulsion point of view to your business. And that's exactly what you want, and they understand that. So I focus on those areas, and I'm seeing more and more CEOs now that we're in this remote environment going, oh no, I didn't do the work on my culture, and now how do I build a culture now? I relied on my office. I relied on the walls of my business to manage and maintain my culture for me. The osmosis, the informal communication, the water cooler moments, the visibility that we had is gone now. So what do I do to build this culture? How do I do it? And now I'm getting a lot of those conversations.
Yeah, and I read something that you wrote. I think it's part of your first book, maybe the second. You can correct me or whatever, but you had said something along the lines of like 1 out of every 10 CEO is thinking about their culture or doing anything to address it. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So it's actually that's direct. That's statistic is directly from my experience. So in order to be able to interview just over 50 leaders, I had to speak to over 500 companies.
Wow.
And the reason for that is, initially I reached out to my network and I said, hi, I'm interviewing CEOs for my next book, and speak to Jack, he's got a great culture. Speak to Mary, she's got a great culture. And so I'd go and speak to Jack, and we'd have a conversation. It would be, how I would start the conversation about, tell me about what you're doing, what have you done around your values and your mission and your vision. And then as soon as we got deeper and deeper into the onion, the layers of culture, where I would ask about how they're embedding, what initiatives they're running, what they've done from a process point of view. There it would be, oh no, we're not. We got an Employee of the Month award, but that doesn't match to our values, and we haven't defined the behaviors against our values, and we're not interviewing for our values, and so I couldn't continue that interview with that person, because as I got deeper and deeper into the onion, it was demonstrated that they either were doing very little, or what they were doing was wrong, fundamentally. Right. So, and those were the people that I was told had strong cultures. Never mind the rest that have really done nothing about it. So it's 1 out of 10 companies are doing something about their culture. Half of that number are doing an okay job.
And of that 90%, would you say that most of them think they're addressing it? They think they're doing something to work on their company culture or have some sort of company culture? Like, what percentage of that 90% that isn't doing it thinks they are?
I don't know the answer to this, but I would guess that 30% think they are, 30% know they're not and just don't know what to do about it, and the other 30% don't care.
They're just like, what's company culture?
They're just going to drive their business their way and fit in or go away. They really don't care. So it's that split would be my guess.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to spend the majority of the conversation talking to the people who are conscious about it, want to address it, and, give them some tactics and dive into that kind of stuff, what you do with your clients. But before we do that, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of address the 90% and say, like, tell them why they should even care in the first place. Like, what are they missing out on by just breezing past their company culture?
So what I would say is I would ask them to think about what's happening right now in their business. Okay, so pre-pandemic, they operated their business in a certain way, and their office did the work for them. Now they don't have an office. What's happening? What's breaking? What are you aware of? Microsoft's research showed that 41% of employees are ready to move. They're ready to go. They're ready to go somewhere else because people are sick and tired of A, the pandemic, B, the way bosses are treating them, the ones who don't invest in their culture. And actually, the third thing is what's going to happen when we're out of this pandemic and you move into a hybrid environment, or if you stay in a fully remote environment. Because you have to, for the people who are working remotely, if you don't treat them, if they feel like second-class citizens, if you don't treat them the right way, that there is no difference between the people in the office and people working from home, they'll feel like second-class citizens, and they will ultimately leave to go somewhere else. So if you are one of those people who didn't really care until now, it's just think about where you are and where you're going and how difficult it is to do what you're doing without the culture's your glue. It's the way we do things around here, and that's changed, and that glue is now deteriorating unless you invest in your culture.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I feel like, I've been in that situation before. Probably everyone's been in that situation before, where you're like at a place and it's just kind of like, there's definitely something better out there, right? And now more than ever, it's like, seems easy to look at options because, there are people who are ahead of the game, ahead of the curve, opening up those opportunities for people to go anywhere, So I think that's a good point and important for people to kind of realize, like, it's more important now than it was even before all this craziness happened.
Way more important. What's going to happen is, so we're currently in this state of what I call false productivity. We're in the state of false productivity because we wake up and we fall into our offices. We don't get on the bus or the tube or get in our car or get on the subway. We got nothing else to do. We're in this pandemic environment. It's scary out there, so we work. And then we have lunch at home, so we continue to work, and then we work, and then maybe we watch some TV, but then we'll do some more work. And we can't go travel, we can't go to clubs, we can't. But once that opens up, people are going to go, okay, I am changing big style, and they're going to be going back to the gym, they're going to be exercising, they're going to be doing things that they would have done normally, and productivity is going to absolutely collapse. Because it's false right now. This productivity is false. The world is not going to be like this forever. And so the forces that are driving people to work as hard as they are going to change. And other companies will open up and demonstrate that they are building remote-first hybrid cultures. Or they will demonstrate they are building strong remote cultures where you can be yourself and you can live the values and fit in with the people that you want to work with, that respect you and want an equal playing field for you as a remote person. I think that's what I would be thinking about if I didn't really think about my culture in the past.
Yeah, and I think that leads in kind of perfectly to the whole remote consulting that you do with everybody. It's crazy. Like, people obviously don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen really either. I mean, we have some ideas maybe, but what are you talking about with these people? Like, what are the things that you have learned already? And just what are these conversations like that you're having with people? What they're worried about, what they're trying to get ahead of, and all that kind of stuff.
I don't know when the pandemic's going to end and if it's going to end. I don't know how things will transition ultimately. Look, if the pandemic rolls on and on and on, and we're in and out and in and out and in and out of this sort of lockdown, not lockdown, then we're in remote work fundamentally. Most of us are going to be remote workers, and if you don't build a remote work culture, people will go to companies where there is a strong remote work culture. When the pandemic does end, then companies will build hybrid cultures. And you will want a hybrid culture because you want to meet up, you want to connect, you want to see people. So I'm seeing these two, but the majority of companies are going to go hybrid when they can. But what I'm seeing is leaders thinking, okay, well, I can just go back to running the business the way I did. And that's actually not possible because you've got to think about if somebody is working remotely, whether they are permanently remote or whether they are remote sometimes or they're in and out of the office, however it works, you will always have people working remotely. And you need to learn from companies that operate in a remote fashion to see what they do. These remote companies like GitLab or Hotjar or Buffer or Zapier or TopTel, they've been remote for years and they've perfected remote. I did a big research study on this of the past 18 months because when I was building my software, I actually started off building it for distributed teams because I was approached by remote companies to say, can you help us? And I realized that my in-person service didn't work because I couldn't get in person with them because they were all remote, working around the world. So I built the software and then decided to study remote work companies. And there are 9 best practices that remote work companies focus on because they don't have an office. And the 9 best practices are really built around an umbrella of culture. So they're deliberate about culture because they have to be. If you run a remote business, if you start a remote business and you don't explain the why of what you're doing, your vision, and you don't explain the values of the types of people you want to work with, your remote business dies really quickly. So culture is the first one. The second one that they focus on is on process. And I ask leaders, what percentage of your processes are documented versus in people's heads? The number ranges between 20 and 40%. That means 60% of the processes in your organization are somewhere else, and I can't access them. So that means I have to get on a Zoom call to understand this process, versus I should just be able to read about the process, the written document. Then I get up to speed without wasting your time on a Zoom call. And so those are 2 of the 9 that remote work companies focus on because they processize everything. They processize meetings. They processize very small things because otherwise you build human bottlenecks in your organization. If the process is in my head, somebody's got to talk to me about it. And I may not have time over the next 4 or 5 days for you to talk to me. So you have to wait 5 days to understand this process, which is ridiculous. You should just be able to read a document.
Yeah, it makes sense to address that because everyone is separate and not able to like go tap somebody on the shoulder, and like that part of working is not a thing anymore. When you go remote, you can't just go grab somebody and be like, hey, how do I do this, or what's the standard way to do this? So like it makes sense to sit down and do all that kind of stuff.
So that then leads into documentation. So if you look at GitLab are sort of the poster child for this. They're the granddaddy of effective remote work. They've got 1,300 employees globally, fully remote. And they have a company manual that's 8,100 pages long.
Oh my gosh.
If you printed
Seriously?
it out. If you printed it out.
Oh my gosh.
And what most people think when they hear that is they think, oh my God, all of that stuff must be dead. It must have gone into a folder to die. No, it's actually on the internet. You can go and search for GitLab company manual, and you can go and read it. And the beauty of it is every single one of those pages is a live working document, because the page has an owner, the page has a cadence, an update cadence, it has a defined audience, a defined time period, and a defined updating process. So documentation doesn't go to die in some folder somewhere. Documentation in a well-run organization that's remote is valuable, is used, and it's important to me because I own this document. Then you look at social connection. We're all getting zoomed out. We don't want to do another damn Zoom call because we've been on 8 hours of these things, and now we've got to do work until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night to catch up on the work we didn't do because of all the Zoom calls. So now we do social connection. We say, come on, everybody, we've got to try and get together for a drink at 5 o'clock. I don't care about your drink. I'm tired. I've got Zoom fatigue. But in remote companies, that doesn't happen because there's a lot of documentation and because they use asynchronous communication. They don't expect synchronous communication. Like the synchronous, you and I have to be available and present to have this call. It means we can't work now. I can't do work now. I am obviously working, but I can't do work. And right. So remote companies look at the difference between synchronous communication, which they try and avoid at all costs, and move it to asynchronous communication, which allows me to respond when I think I can and when I need to. Then they focus on well-being. Pre-pandemic, remote companies knew that remote work is lonely, it's hard sometimes, it's not easy, especially when you're stressed and things aren't going well. Now you add a pandemic and then you add remote work. There are so many people burning out now, there are mental health issues, and it's happening below the radar. People are not aware of the burnout that's coming. And it's going to poof, poof. And burnout is a bad place to be because burnout means I'm not coming back to your company and I'm probably not coming back to this line of work. I'm burnt out.
Right.
So well-being is something that remote companies focus on. Trust, trust and transparency. If we are transparent, I have nothing to hide, so you can trust me. So remote companies really lean heavily towards transparency, transparent environments, because it builds psychological safety. And then allowing people to work and work on an output or outcomes-based, results-based leadership model means that I can let you get on with it, I trust you to do it, and you will come to me when you have a problem. I don't have to micromanage you. Micromanagement is an absolute disaster. And then the last couple are hiring and onboarding. Remote companies work really hard on this. Hiring in particular, because people relied on being able to read body language. I could sense the room. I could sense the person in the room. But I can't read you now. I've got a sense of you, but that's all, a slight sense, versus meeting somebody face to face. So remote companies build different recruitment capabilities, and they onboard heavily to make sure that you hit the ground running. So if you think about it, if I am now transitioning to a hybrid environment, or I'm transitioning to a remote environment, I have to be thinking about those 9 things, because that's what remote companies do well.
I mean, that's amazing. I think all that stuff makes a lot of sense. And probably, when you say that to somebody, it's like, yes, sure, all those things make a lot of sense. But that's a lot. I think, I could see somebody being overwhelmed by, you want me to, do all of this? and I'm busy already. So like, how do you rule this out? Is there, I'm sure you probably cover this in your book, but like, how do you roll this out in an effective way to, like, people need to do this quickly, right? I mean, if they want to compete with the other people that are, focusing on
moving
this.
quicker for some reason. Yeah, exactly. So first of all, do an analysis against these 9 best practices. Where are you at? Documentation, poor. Most companies will be poor with synchronous, moving from synchronous to asynchronous work. Okay, we're okay with social connection because our people are good with that. So work out what you're doing well and what you're not doing so well, and then look at what the low-hanging fruit is. Changing people's behaviors to start documenting stuff needs to be done in baby steps. You can't just feed them the whole chicken. And start by saying, what's an important process to you? Just bullet point those steps. And then over time, start adding context to those steps. And then share it with everybody so they can add context to those steps. But it's still your document. It's still your process. It's important that, documentation is one area. Moving to trust or transparency is hard for some leaders. So I wouldn't necessarily jump in there too quickly. But it's literally do an analysis of these 9 best practices, where you're stronger, where you're weaker, and then choose 2 or 3 to work on. Social connection is really important because social connection is one of the keys, especially remotely, to the glue that needs to be strengthened in this environment. People feeling that they're not alone, people feeling that they can trust the people they work with, people feeling like they can relate to those people and they can be engaged with those people. That social connection, if you get it right on a micro level, building micro communities, like a company like Zapier, for example, are fully remote. They have over 100 #fun/ channels. Wine lovers, dog lovers, parents, chess, Dungeons and Dragons, whatever it is. People build communities around those, and those communities overlap, which then strengthen your community. But it's around what does it feel like to be low hanging, and then how do we start doing some of the bigger heavy lifting stuff, and then rolling it out over time. Look, if you're in a position where you're understaffed, under-resourced, make it the team's responsibility as well. Get people thinking about it at a team level. And don't expect too much, but demonstrate to the team that you're moving in that direction so that they can at least in their mind say that the implicit agreement that they signed with you 2 years ago pre-pandemic, in other words, we didn't sign an implicit agreement, but we agreed something that we would work in a certain way. Now that we've had to adapt, we will continue to work in a certain way that works for us. And people won't leave as quickly.
It's funny because the more conversations I have about this, I see a parallel with like mental health, where it's like people can let themselves get to such a bad place before it gets to this point where it's like, this has to be addressed, and I don't know. It's just interesting to me because we all know we should focus on it, right? We all know, and applying to both, mental health and, company culture. It's just weird. I see like this strange link between those two things. And I don't know, it seems like there's so many people in that place of like, stuff it away, stuff it away, stuff it away. I'll deal with that later. And it just never happens.
Well, something happens.
Yeah, something definitely happens.
Something happens. It's just whether it's up to you or not. Are you going to be in control of it or not? As a company, your responsible fiduciary duty as a leader in the company is to make sure that company continues to progress and develop. And so this is part of that. This ultimately is part of your fiduciary duty. But it is hard. It's not easy. There's no magic wand here. This is a change that we've all been thrown into, and the companies that adapt the fastest and the quickest and the smartest will be the companies that, like Google and Facebook 2 or 3 years ago, where they'd throw millions of dollars at their offices and sleep pads and chill rooms and bean bags and chefs and sushi and sleepover rooms and all of that sort of stuff. That's going to change. That was then. Now it's going to be candidates will interview based on, tell me about your culture. How are you designing this for hybrid work? How are you designing this for remote work? How am I going to feel like a first or second class citizen in your environment? And that's going to be those interview questions will start coming through in the near future.
What do you think? I'm curious about what's going to happen here. Like, from the flip side, from the company side, competing for candidates, what do you think is going to become kind of the trend there? Because, the ones that do have good cultures, as that number starts to grow and as more people start to really own their culture and their remote culture and all that stuff, it's going to be a pretty competitive landscape for employers to attract good people and get them integrated into their organization. So what do you see companies doing to compete for that talent?
So if you look at a company like Hotjar have designed the process to make sure that people that want to work in their organization are well suited to work in their organization. That doesn't mean they can do the job. It means they can work the way Hotjar wants to work, which means fully remote, lots of documentation, very humble, and a very strong culture around that. Then you've got other companies that design onboarding, which starts at minus 30 days. So the first message you receive from them is, really great. It's 30 days before you start. Really great that you're coming on board. Super chuffed to have you with us from the manager. Minus 15 days, they get a message from somebody else. Minus 10 days, minus 5, minus 4, minus 3, minus 2, minus 1, 0. So they've probably received 12 messages from the company before they've even started. Then at 0, it's plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, and they build buddy systems. And so if you look at the way these remote companies design their processes around attraction and retention, as I go through the interview with Hotjar, I know I want to work at this company because of the way they are allowing me to understand how they work and how I can demonstrate to them how I work. And I know that I want to work in this company because their culture is demonstrated to me, and the way that their people operate is the way I operate. The values they have are the values that I can relate to. So that's the shift. It's not going to be I need a job. This sounds okay. The offices look nice, and what you say matters. It sounds like this is good. This is actually, it's a completely change around. We demonstrate to you that you can work here and we can work with you, and vice versa, and we want that. Which means that I hit the ground running because the onboarding is so good, and the buddy systems are so good, and the culture transition and the documentation is so good.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because it seems like a huge opportunity right now to stand out and be very vocal about what this podcast is about. It's employer branding, and I think we're entering this space where you have the opportunity to stand out just by saying, hey, we kind of give a shit about our culture. We give a shit about our people. You might not have ever even heard of us as a company, but I see this opportunity kind of opening up where it's like, if you can figure out how to address all of those things we talked about in the first place, but then B, telling your story as a company and getting that stuff out there, there's going to be a huge opportunity to attract good talent just by being able to articulate that and get that message in front of people that may be in a position where they're looking for something else, that's more suitable.
Well, you're spot on. You're exactly right. If you look at the Netflix put their Culture Deck up online in 2009. And that was Reed Hastings just saying, I'm tired of doing onboarding, and then when half the people realize what kind of a culture we're building, half of them leave. So he put it online, and he said, basically, read this 125-page presentation so you understand what the culture is before you arrive here. And that allowed them to attract amazing people because that document's been read over 20 million times since 2009.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's like sort of the ultimate example of culture and employer branding.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. I think, a lot of people don't like obviously employer brand is kind of gaining some steam and becoming a more popular thing now as we talk about it. But I don't know. I'm curious to see where it's going to go because, to me, I can see the importance behind it, but it hasn't caught on everywhere yet. I feel like it's still in such an infant stage, aside from those leaders who are, kind of setting the groundwork way ahead of time, the really innovative companies like Netflix and that.
Yeah, I think there is a big opportunity in this space to really take a position and own it, frankly. As you say, there are companies that are doing things that are in this space, but I don't think anybody's cracked it really. And I think the pandemic has forced culture up the list of priorities, and I think culture and employer branding are really almost the same thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why it sort of floats in between. It's employer branding. There's more to it. There's more communicated to it than just culture. Because culture, people try and sort of put culture in a box under HR. But actually, it's just the way we do things around here as a company, and what you should know as a potential employee or as a current employee about how we operate and how you can fulfill your potential here. So yeah, I do think it's going to change really quickly.
What are some areas you mentioned before? You go into a lot of these meetings with a lot of clients, and the first thing you guys talk about is their, why am I drawing a blank right now? Their values. And what are some values that you commonly see that's like, that doesn't really translate, that doesn't speak much to the people that may want to come and be a part of the team? Are there common ones you see that's like, that's not very inspiring, or, obviously if you put like make money as your value, like that's not going to really resonate with people, but like, are there other things similar to that you run into?
Well, I'm not sure about that. Actually, Goldman Sachs, really, lots of people want to work there, and they're all about making money.
That's true. Yeah, I guess if that's
there's
the
no
kind of people you want.
There's no such thing as a good or bad culture. There's no such thing as a right or wrong culture. There's only a strong functional culture or a weak and dysfunctional culture. So good or bad is in relation to me. Do I want to work in this culture or not? Would it be good for me or not? But a company's culture cannot be good or bad. So, for example, the mafia. If you're born into that family, then you don't have a problem putting a bullet through somebody's knee. It's the right thing to do, and that's the way the culture should be. And that's a strong, functional culture. If you're an outsider like me, I don't want to work in the mafia. So that's bad for me. I wouldn't want that. Okay? But in terms of values, the main problem I see with values is they're nonsense. They're bullshit. The leadership team came up with them, and they're aspirational, and nobody on the ground really lives them. And so nobody really cares about them. And so that's the problem I see with values. It's not about the employer reading it and going, okay, I don't relate to this. What they don't relate to is the same old words, but no context around those words. So what does resilience mean? Because you could put everybody has to be resilient right now. Why is your business, what's relevant to your business that I should connect to? Or should I just make it up for you? Should I interpret that word? Which is what most companies let you do. Incorrectly, they let me interpret what resilience means. And I'm a human being, so I interpret for me first. Then I interpret for the company second. So not allowing people to interpret your values is really critical. You've got to tell people what your values mean.
Yeah, I'm curious, like I've never had to do that practice of sitting down. Like how do you, if you don't have values created or you don't have good ones created, how do you sit down and come up with that? I feel like it could be such a complex process to throw some stuff against the dartboard, see what sticks, and then be like, well, we like the idea, but it's not that strong, like how do we flesh that out and kind of like what you just said, make it more real than a just fluffy word.
Yeah, so there are two types of values. There are current values and there are aspirational values. So I believe that a set of company values should have a mixture of both. And the process of doing this is, on the one hand, yes, you can put post-it notes up on the wall and write words or talk about the animal or write what is good for the business. But ultimately, you've got to first of all be able to go and say, okay, that value is important to me as the leader. And this is how I live it myself. This is not how I wish I lived it. This is how I live it myself. Or if I aspire to that, this is what I can demonstrate that I currently do along that journey of aspiration. Can't be we want to be transparent and you don't share anything at all ever. Because that's just nonsense. We want transparency, but we aren't transparent at all. You've got to be able to show, okay, we want a certain level of transparency, and currently we are sharing this and this and this, and it's aspirational to get there. I built the software I built. I take companies through this process of defining the current values, which often have negative behaviors or values associated with them, because a company develops good and bad behaviors and habits and norms as part of their culture over time. Then the aspirational values are all positive. We look at the overlap of the two, the aspirational and the current values, and then we shortlist a group of values and dig into the behaviors around those values. So if you can, for example, say, okay, in the value of collaboration, let's say we want to collaborate, we want to be excellent at collaborating. How do we currently collaborate? And out of 10, are we really good at this or not? How aspirational is this, and how are we going to change that? Because just putting a value up and not thinking about it, and not thinking about where we actually are right now and how we get to this promised land of collaboration, means that you're just going, oh, that would be nice, but nothing will change, nothing will happen to make it change. So it's not an easy exercise. Some people find it easier than others, but the most important thing, I believe, is to include the team. You can't just sit there as leaders and go, we'll have these 5 values, and then the rest of your company go, well, we weren't involved in those. We don't feel engaged, or they're not relevant to us, so good luck.
It's interesting because I feel like, you talking about this makes me think of just personal life, like when you want to make a change in your personal life, you want to evolve as a person or whatever, you can sit down and write that stuff out. You can say, here are my goals. Here's the person I want to become. But there's a difference between writing that down on paper and then fully incorporating that into your daily routines and processes, and like actually building the systems that are required to become that person, right? And in the context of the company, obviously there's stuff you have to do. There are changes you have to make to get to that new company that you want to become, right? So but that's a process, you have to figure out like, okay, what do I need to change on a daily basis? And in a company, I feel like it can be more complex because you're dealing with so many different people. It's not just yourself, right? You have every department, every person inside that department, and you've got to think about every single one of those people and their actions and processes, right? Like every day.
Yeah, it is, and it isn't more complex. The problem with being as an individual trying to go through a change like this is nobody holds us account but us. But in a company, if the CEO wants change to happen, they will make that change happen. So company culture is this invisible, subconscious, intangible thing. But actually embedding culture is quite simple. There are only 6 ways to embed culture. What you reward and recognize, what you measure and pay attention to, how you hire, fire, and promote, where you train, mentor, and educate, where you allocate resources, and how you behave in crisis or difficult situations. So let me give you a couple of examples. If you as a CEO say customer success is really important to us, but you don't measure it or pay attention to it, you don't hire good people for it, and you don't reward or recognize anybody for it, everybody realizes you're talking nonsense. Everybody realizes that that's just hot air, because you are demonstrating that you invest in sales rather than investing in customer service. When there's a crisis situation, you push it under the carpet, you ignore it. It means that customer success is not important to you. So actually embedding culture is much easier in an organization relatively than embedding a new persona in you, because we revert back to our our original default personalities. And so we revert back as human beings in business if we don't have anybody managing the process. We don't have somebody embedding it in a deliberate, intentional fashion.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It is more difficult to hold yourself accountable, obviously. And I think on the business side, it's like the struggle probably comes more from actually committing to the change, right? Or committing to it as the CEO, as the leadership team, and, carrying out those qualities within your actions too.
It requires work. It's culture doesn't just happen. Well, culture does happen, but it happens by default, and that's often the wrong culture. To build yourself, well, not the wrong culture. That's often a weak or dysfunctional culture. To build a strong functional culture, you need to work on it. It's like anything. If you want to start, you want to get fit, you got to stretch, you got to exercise, you got to do things. It's the same thing. It's just you've got to work at it.
Would you do you think we're in a crisis of culture globally? Do you feel like somehow this part of running a business and this part has just been missed by the majority of people? Is it just extremely thoughtful people or extremely empathic people, whatever it is, that understand this on a fundamental level in the beginning? Why is there such a problem here, do you think?
I call culture development its own pandemic. If you think about a pandemic, what is a the pandemic forces us to do things we don't want to do. A pandemic is stressful. A pandemic causes anxiety. A pandemic is threatening towards us. If you are in a weak, dysfunctional culture, you experience all those things. You experience discomfort. You're anxious. You're stressed. You don't want to be there. You can't do what you want to do. You can't be who you want to be. And so I believe that the lack of culture development in most companies is its own pandemic, because you've got people in the wrong jobs doing the wrong things for the wrong leaders who are leading in the wrong way because they don't know how to do it right. It's a great question. We are definitely in a culture crisis.
Yeah, and it's weird because there's just all this pressure, I think, on everybody to go get a job, start the career, you find what you can, work is scarce, there's just this mentality of I need, it's almost like being picky about a job is selfish, or it's not a good thing to do. I don't know. There's a pressure to go take whatever you can, be grateful for it. But at the same time, those people 6 months later find themselves depressed. They find themselves hating the work that they're doing, or not connected to the company, the work, and all that stuff. And I've been there before. I'm guilty of that. I'm sure a lot of people are guilty of that, where it's I took what, I have a certain set of skills. This place needed that. It was a paycheck, But if I really took a step back and looked at it from my soul's perspective and said, was I really compelled to work for this company because I was connected to the work they're doing and their mission and their values, or was it just for a paycheck? So I don't know. I mean, if there's a solution to that, if people should just take more time and be more selective, and I don't know. I mean, it's tough, right? It's always a balancing act.
It's not easy. People should try and be more selective, but it's not always possible. And, leaders don't know how to do this. They don't know how to build a strong functional culture. So that's the challenge. And that's my challenge, is to, change this over the next, 20 years or whatever it is, I'm going to, that's going to be my role. My job is to change the culture of business globally.
What do you think your biggest challenge is ahead of you, like in the near future? What's the biggest broken piece that seems addressable? If you could just sit down with the right people and get their attention and say, like, okay, we're willing to fix this. Like, what do they need to work on?
I think just getting people defining relevant values and then starting to embed those and live those values and model those values. That's the key piece. And then realizing that culture is actually a business function, or it should be. It's like sales or marketing or engineering. You should treat culture that way in your organization. And I think if we get to that level, then we'll be in a better place. But it's getting people to understand how powerful culture is, both negative and positive.
I'm sure you get this question a lot, and what we're talking about kind of leads to this obvious question. Business leaders are a lot of times analytical people. They're looking at numbers, reporting numbers, and culture is this like infamously hard thing to track its success, right? You can roll it out and begin to work on it, but it's hard to measure, right? It's hard to get a gauge other than just like a vibe or a feel, So how do you approach that side of things when people ask you, like, well, how do I know if this is working or if it's worth the effort?
Ultimately, when I work with my clients, I give them a system, and that system has inputs and outputs, and we measure those. So it's a long process, and it's an involved process, but the aim is really to build it into a system and a function in the business. What you can do is you can start looking at employee engagement. You can look at different factors. Employee engagement isn't your culture, but it's one step towards understanding more about your culture, getting feedback, asking the right questions, following those questions over time, and then comparing yourself to other people in the similar industry. I think that's a really good place to start, and then build out from there.
So if you're a company and you want to figure out like where you're at right now, and just take a snapshot of like, what is our culture like right now? And not just from your own idea of it, but to actually get feedback from people within the organization. How do you do that? What do you suggest for people there?
You can do a fairly short survey where you can use one of the survey tools and just go and say, the easiest way is to ask, would you advise your friends to come and work at this company? That's the simplest question. Because if the answer is yes, 9 out of 10, you've got a pretty strong culture. If your answer is below 5, you've got a weak culture.
But what about getting the truth, though? I mean, people don't necessarily tell the truth in those situations.
But if it's anonymous, you'll get the truth.
Okay, so you do an anonymous survey,
and you can ask a bunch of questions, but that's the key one. If essentially it's an NPS, your Net Promoter Score. If that's not great, then your culture. It's about if the people in your organization would care about their friends enough to not introduce them to your company, then you're not in a great place.
Yeah, I would hate to put that survey out to my employees and get like 4 out of 10 back. I mean,
it'd be good for you to know.
Yeah. And I would imagine most people don't think that would be the results, right? I think most people who are busy running the organization and whatever, it's like they hear complaints or they hear things, but I don't know if any of those people would come to you and say, like, I know my culture sucks. I know nobody likes it here. Otherwise, why would you have not done something about that,
Well, people don't know how to do it. It's like for example, if you look at the cars of today, the cars of the 1960s, you could open the bonnet, open the hood, and you could kind of get an idea of what had gone wrong. If you open the hood of a car today, it's just a black box. You wouldn't know where to start. You'd have to get a computer and connect it and work out what's gone wrong. So it's the same thing. It's the same principle. It's a black box that nobody knows how to really open and how to read. And in writing Own Your Culture, that's what I try to solve, is help companies with that.
So if someone finds himself in this position and they're like, okay, we need to address this. It's something we care about and we realize needs to happen for our company. Is that all they need to do? They just pick up a copy of your book, follow through the process? Or is there, bringing in outside eyes and all that kind of stuff? Like, is that necessary part of the process, do you think? Or can people handle this on their own?
Some people can handle this on their own, definitely. You could read my book and from start to finish and be able to implement a strong functional culture. That's the aim. Most companies don't have the time, don't have the resources, don't have the emotional intelligence in the system to be able to do it. But reading the book is better than sort of knowing, being more, it's about awareness, it's about knowledge. Mm-hmm. So knowing that there are other companies that do these things to strengthen their culture means you could try some of this stuff. You could do some of this. And knowing that there is actually a system you can build in your organization and understanding how other companies do it, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I put myself in that position, at least having a roadmap, at least going from this place of like, oh my God, this is a disaster, to like, okay, there is a solution, there is a plan I can follow and implement, and to salvation, for lack of a better word there. I think it's interesting too, and another parallel with the like personal development kind of side of things. It's like sometimes it is helpful to have that outside perspective, like we talked about. Even in a business, if you're the top level, if you're the CEO, you might want to roll this out, but you are ultimately kind of holding yourself accountable when you're at the very top, So I think it does make sense in some situations to kind of seek outside help and have somebody there who can hold you accountable to a sense, and just rebound back and forth, keep you on track, and make sure.
It's not easy doing this. You often need an outsider because that outsider is unbiased. The outsider has no, hidden initiatives or no hidden agendas, or I just come in and I want to make your company better. That's all. I don't want to build a culture so that I get more out of this or more out of that, or I don't want to lead the culture initiative so that I get the next promotion. There's nothing to do with that. It's just I tell CEOs what to do, when to do it. I have a very close working relationship with every single CEO with the companies I work with, because it starts with them and then it trickles down. Yeah. And so I can give advice around the meeting cadence, the communication in the meeting, that the head of HR probably can't, because the head of HR is just used to this. They're used to this. They're not looking at it from the outside going, actually, that could be done better, if this, if that. And that would improve and strengthen the culture.
And I would imagine, too, that anybody who is inside of that organization, who is unhappy, who does realize, like, this culture sucks, or there is stuff that needs to be addressed, by bringing in an outsider, that indicates right there, like, hey, we're taking this seriously, we're making changes, Whereas in some situations, I could imagine, you go to your people and you say, hey, we're going to change, we're going to address this. And it's like, yeah, okay, we've heard that before, So I don't know. I think it's an interesting idea. And it sounds like we're like pitching to hire a consultant or whatever. But I think, if you had a dysfunctional mental health and you're just like, I got this, I'll do it on my own. It's like a lot of times that doesn't work. People fail with that a lot of times. So I don't know. I think I like the idea of saying like, hey, we're serious about this. And yes, it's a financial investment. Yes, there's a commitment to it. That's difficult. Nobody's trying to lie to you here and say it's not going to be difficult. But, if you want to succeed, you need to take it seriously. And if that means, if you can't do it on your own, and that means you got to bring in someone from the outside, then that's what it means. But what's more important? Like, name something in your business that's more important than that, right? Like,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
not that much, right?
Exactly.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on and having the conversation. I want to definitely make sure people have a chance to find your books and find you and connect with you if they want to do that. So take this time to, point people in the direction of that kind of stuff. And yeah.
Cool, Dylan. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate you.
So people can reach me at my website, which is www.culturegene.ai. And actually, if people want to reach out to me directly, they can just hit me up at brett@culturegene.ai. I love to talk about culture. I spend 20% of my time learning because I'm a student of culture. My books are available on Amazon, Culture Decks Decoded, and Own Your Culture. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and Clubhouse if people want to follow me there. And yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. And I hope your audience can take something from this.
I hope so too. We'll see some companies start to get a little healthier, a little bit better culture out there if they do.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. I hope we get a chance to do it again sometime. I know we just kind of scratched the surface here, and there's a lot deeper we can go. So if the people want it, it shall happen.
Very good.
All right. Thanks, Brett.